Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 2022 Lit Talks from the Connecticut Literary Festival. I'm Joe Cimbarello. I'm the director of the Connecticut Literary Festival. I want to thank Anna Cristiano. She is our production supervisor for the Lit Talk season. The Lit Talks are produced by Central Connecticut State University and the students there, and we are generously supported by the good people at the CT Humanities here in the state of Connecticut who have supported us with a partnership grant for the year. So I want to thank them. And we're also supported by readers like you who support the festival. The festival is really three components. We have a literary anthology. We have the on-ground festival, which we pulled off with a lot of COVID juggling, barely. And now we have our Lit Talks this year. The Lit Talk, this is our first one of 2022, but we will continue through the spring. Check our schedule on the website. There's a button there you can hit, or just check ConnecticutLiteraryFestival.org. We have a couple highlights. We are going to have a big Earth Day festival this year. Hopefully live at Real Artways, one of our partners, with the Poet Laureate of the state, Margaret Gibson, and we're looking forward to that. But tonight it is Pandemic Publishing. I want to welcome the moderator for the evening is Lara Ehrlich. She's the author of Animal Wife, the winner of the Red Hen Fiction Prize, and she's the host of the podcast Writer, Mother, Monster, which is awesome. You should check it out. The logo is terrific. It's a conversation that devotes to the dismantling of the myth of having it all, and she is the director of marketing for the International Festival of Arts and Ideas here in Connecticut. So Lara, you want to join me up here on the big screen? Nice to see you with all of our guests tonight. Lara is we call her a pandemic book. You had a pandemic book early in the thing. So just before we get into our guests, as a writer, what would it been like to go through the pandemic, Lara?
Yeah, thank you, Jotham. Thank you for having me, and welcome to all of our panelists tonight and to all of you for joining us. Thank you so much. As Jotham mentioned, my book, Animal Wife, which I just, of course, happen to have here, and I'll show you all.
Oh, my God. How about that?
Yeah, there it is. So it debuted. This is my first book, and it came out, of course, during a global pandemic, which was at first disappointing because of, like probably many of you, I dreamed about those live events where I would go and stay with friends across the country.
It didn't happen.
No, it didn't happen. And you yourself have a book that came out during the pandemic, so you know what I'm talking about. But as we'll talk about, hopefully tonight, there were some silver linings to having a book come out during a pandemic. And one of those was that the virtual space really exploded for authors and for publishers and for the whole industry. And I learned very quickly, thank goodness I have a position in the real world as a director of marketing for an arts festival. I learned very quickly how to do virtual events, and we'll talk about that as well. And so it was a unique challenge, and actually it turned out to be a lot of fun to try to figure out how to have events in a virtual space that felt exciting and compelling and interactive. And I actually got to engage with a lot more writers than I would have otherwise. People who were all the way across the country who I could never have traveled to have an event with were right here in this virtual space with me. So I would say that was the highlight for me.
That was interesting. You're right, because we would have maybe people at like a bookstore here in Connecticut, but now this kind of worldwide audience that you had some access to. And I know Megan later is a bookstore owner. She'll see if actually people buy books. You could ask her that when we send these, but that's been fun. And I know tonight, before I let you, I'm going to take off and go in the auditorium. I know we had a little change in the programming tonight. What was that? I know we had a little switch up, and like this, I have to say, we planned this in October and we canceled, and then it was going to be in December. So like tonight, it's kind of apropos that we had a change here at the last minute.
Yes, absolutely. That's just the world that we find ourselves in, and something else we'll be talking about tonight is flexibility and creativity. So we pivoted, and we have two wonderful editors and publishers with us here this evening. We have Toby Harper from Red Hen Press, and we have, Matt Winkler from Woodall Press, who will be talking about the publishing side of publishing in a pandemic. So we look forward to talking to them in a little while.
You're expecting to see Diane from Black Lawrence. We love Diane and Black Lawrence. She couldn't be here, so we actually got a 2-for-1. I think we all win. So have fun, Lara. Thanks for moderating. I'll see you guys at the end, and I'm going to go have a root beer in the auditorium with my friends.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. And if you all see my eyes shifting, it's because I'm watching your comments and your questions. So if you want to pose questions in the chat during the conversation, I'll weave them in. And that's why you'll see me sort of looking all around the screen. But first, Anna, let's bring up our agent of the evening, Mark Gottlieb. And as we bring him up, I will introduce him. Mark is a prominent literary agent at Trident Media Group in New York City. He is ranked highly among agents across the industry for overall number of deals and other individual categories. Mark has represented New York Times bestselling authors as well as major award-winning authors, and he has optioned and sold numerous books to production companies and studios for film and TV adaptation. He describes his role in publishing in 5 words as fosterer, sensei, believer, Sherpa, and champion. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Really kind introduction. And this is a really nice event. Very well put together. I'm just happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. No, we're happy to have you. So, what we'll do, I think, with each of our guests is briefly talk about your role in publishing in normal times. And then we'll shift and we'll talk about what it's been like in the pandemic and what advice you might have for writers. And I have some specific questions for you around that. But tell us quickly, can you kind of frame your work as an agent in normal times, and then talk about the biggest way in which the pandemic has either impacted or changed your work in the last few years?
So in normal times, what my work is, we really bring authors to book publishers and then in turn to a much wider audience. And we handle every manifestation a book can take, whether there's a books to be adapted for film and TV, or foreign rights for books in translation or audiobooks. It's really no different than what a talent agent does out west for like a movie star or director, only we do specifically for books. Or if you want to think of it in unglamorous terms, it's like an employment agent for authors. You know, we help them get work with a publisher. In normal times, you know, we're able to do that work and at a pretty high level. I mean, there are a lot of number 1 New York Times bestselling authors, Pulitzer Prize winning authors at the agency I work, you name it. I would say in pandemic times, sort of the challenges became later on explaining to authors why their books weren't publishing exactly on publication date, even though it was listed that they were supposed to publish on a certain date. Sometimes the books were shipping 3 or 4 weeks out. And then even with that, there was a shortage of paper stock. What happened early on in the pandemic, and there's like so much perspective we have now, I think like a year out from all that, and a lot of lessons from it. But early on, we saw that people were reading a lot because they were at home. So paperback sales soared, especially classics. Like people finally had time to read these massive tomes. And it was great. But then Amazon began prioritizing certain orders. So food, medicine, water, things like that, hygiene needs, things like that were prioritized over books. And at first, people were really adamant about, well, books are essential, which, yeah, they are. But in a life or death situation, people really need food and water and medicine. So books were delayed for that reason. Bookstores weren't really open or operating at limited capacity. And so I know one of your guests can probably speak more about this, but so they had trouble getting people in store. Barnes & Noble had a lot of closures, bookstores had a lot of closures. And then because people couldn't get their books on time, there was a massive uptick in ebooks and audiobooks. What happened was, because bookstores were operating at very limited capacity by turns, so were publishers. Early on in the pandemic, they were thinking of a better day. I think publishers are still thinking of a better day, because whenever they buy a book, they're thinking what's going to happen 12 to 18 months later when the book publishes. They're not necessarily thinking what's happening today. And so they were still buying books, and they are still buying books. I think what happened early on, also in the pandemic, was a lot of our competitors thought, well, we're just going to sort of sit back and see how this all plays out and kind of halt submissions to publishers for the time being, which I think was a mistake in part because, one, it created a lot of openings, opportunities for other agencies to just continue submitting books to publishers. So it kept us really busy with publishers. And then also when agencies started to feel the brunt of this stuff, I think much smaller agencies, and the majority of them, when you really go outside this kind of top tier of maybe like 10 or 20 agencies, they're very small, like one or two people in a home office thing. And if they lost a big client or this pandemic, I think it probably put a lot of folks out of business. So I think it was really hard for smaller companies, even like the government stepped in to help. Yeah. But the good news is books still came out in 2020. Authors found creative ways to promote books. Some publishers were forgiving of authors, like kind of grading on the curve, is to say, well, they published in a pandemic year. Let's see how the next book under contract does. So some authors were, fortunate in that way. And now that publishers have a better handle on all this, I think what they're doing is they're rerouting a lot of books in their publication. They're planning publications farther out. They realize when they have a big book coming out, they have to spread the printing across multiple printing plants. They can't just do it in one place. So it's a lot of just moving around and kind of rolling with the punches.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer. So tell me a little bit about the authors that you work with. I found, just as a personal anecdote, when I sent a draft of a novel to my agent, she said for the first time in her whole career, she had every one of the authors on her list send her a draft of a novel at the same time. And this was, I think, the new year after the pandemic had started. So there was this sense of like, I'm home, I'm going crazy, I need to funnel this into my manuscript and send it and have something happen because I feel isolated and things are stalled.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, on the one hand, at first, a lot of authors were holding off. They thought they would kind of wait this out. And then they were at home writing. They realized that this was kind of this new normal, and then that they still needed to be writing and publishing. So they started sending books out, and every time that the New Year rolls around, like it happened this year too, it's like everyone has their New Year's resolution, and so there's a big influx of books. But it's okay because publishers every quarter, have a new budget to work with, so they're buying books and they have their war chest ready to go. So it's really good, in that sense. And also, clients, we were still submitting books in the pandemic and still busy. And it's like, I once said to one of my colleagues, I said to him, I submit books even in the summer when people say like that's the doldrums of book publishing. And I said, I can submit them in the holidays. And he said, yeah, me too. And I've never been busier. And I said, maybe it's because all these other agencies are holding off from submissions. So I think it's the same thing with the pandemic and the new year. It cleared the logjam of submissions. Publishers were still buying books and publishing them, just in slightly different ways, like scheduling payments differently. Yeah. Maybe not paying half on signing, half on delivery of a manuscript, but maybe they pay like in thirds or fourths, like another one of those payments on publication, or another one of those payments on paperback publication, because it helped publishers with their cash flow problems during the pandemic to break up the payments.
That makes sense. Yeah. And before we actually move to our publishers to have a conversation about publishing in a pandemic, last question for you, and then we'll talk to you again in a little while. But what's the single most important thing you might tell a writer who is at the beginning of their career, so they might be seeking an agent during a global pandemic?
I think if you're a nonfiction author, really focusing on building out your platform, making it such that it's not just an interesting book or idea that's well written, or that you're an authority on the subject matter, but that you are working on building a really big following. And in the world of fiction, I think, yeah, quality writing and storytelling, but also kinds of the similar bells and whistles that go with it. Attending prestigious writers' workshops and conferences. A lot of people are still going out and getting their MFA, publishing in literary magazines and journals, collecting endorsements for their work. So it all lends like a lot of provenance to what the author is doing and makes them really appealing to agents and editors in the process.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon, Mark, so stay tuned. And Anna, let's bring up our two editors and publishers, and I will introduce them as we get them up here. So Toby Harper is the Deputy Director of Red Hen Press and founder and editor of its queer publishing series Quill. She is also an instructor at UCLA Extension Writers Program and publisher of the LA Review. She has a BA from UC Santa Barbara with a major in English literature, an emphasis in literature of the environment, and a minor in queer studies. And she earned an MA at San Francisco State in English with a focus on queer literature. She describes her role in publishing in 5 words as marketing, editing, reading, technology, enthusiasm. Now, Matt Winkler is the COO of Woodall Press. He continuously improves Woodall's operations to better serve its authors, distributors, wholesalers, retailers, and customers. Drawing on his diverse background in project management, inventory management, and sales, he helps Woodall Press innovate new ways to deliver high-quality books, audiobooks, ebooks, and other media to a vast audience. He describes his role in publishing in 5 words as publish, bestselling, and new writers. So welcome, Toby and Matt.
Thanks.
There you both are. It's great to see you.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
you.
Glad to be here.
So same question, I guess, and you can decide who goes first, but I'd love for both of you to answer. Tell us briefly in normal times, what's the about your role in the publishing industry, and then if you could talk a little bit about the way in which the pandemic has impacted or changed your work, the biggest way. I'm sure there are lots of ways. I can call on somebody. I'll start with Matt because he's right next to me, and then we'll go to Toby.
Yeah, there you go.
Sure, no problem. So I do most of the stuff kind of behind the curtain. We have editors who interact more with the authors and the submissions, and I kind of keep the gears turning on the production side. I think the biggest difference in the pandemic has been the supply chain issues. Paper has been scarce and the prices have gone up. And, as Mark said a moment ago, publishers are having to kind of triage their printing to several different facilities to make sure that it all comes through. We've really focused on building those relationships so that we're never caught short. And we've tried to kind of extend our workflow timeline so that we can anticipate interruptions and have a minute to pivot. So that I think is really the main difference. I know on the author side, we talked about how there's fewer in-person events, sadly, with the pandemic. We've been lucky, and we've had some of those, but we've also done things like this. I mean, here there's 72 people on this Zoom platform, and we had a great launch for this book, Fast Funny Women, edited by Gina Barreca with tons of flash nonfiction pieces, and Diane's books hosted an event, and there was over 100 people, I think, attending. So I think that the world has shifted with the times as well. So there are differences, but I think we've still managed to accomplish our business.
Thank you, Matt. Toby, over to you.
All right. So I'd say my role normally and my role now is really very similar, with some extra bonus jobs. So my role is marketing, the marketing director and the deputy director, which basically means, of course, that I focused most specifically on marketing. I'm responsible for earned revenue for sold books, right, at Red Hen. I also do editing, right, with Quill, but also in general. I don't edit every project that comes in, but there are specific projects that are sort of like my purview, right? Like I'm definitely like the resident queer editor. with Quill and also just in general. It's sort of my jam. And then management of just like workflow in the office has always been me as the marketing person, right? I set the pub dates. I mean, I don't necessarily decide every book we require or what season it's in, but once that's been chosen, I choose the dates, which means that I also say, this is when I need galleys, this is when I need fill in the blank, right, all the way up. So I'm still managing all of that, and then of course remanaging it over and over as things like, like our printer. I think November of last year, one of our main printers let us know that they were full up on jobs through September 2022. And they told us that in like November 2021. So yeah, finding all sorts of new printers and how to manage all that, and being grateful that so many reviewers only accept digital galleys now. It's made it a lot easier. For the whole first year, actually, I think I want to say like 20, I think I counted it at some point. For too many months, I personally did every single mailing that went out of Red Hen, every final copy, if we happen to do that directly, every galley, everything I did myself. And so that, added, going from a team that did that to one person who did it, probably for the first year at least, added maybe like 20 hours of work a week-ish, depending on the week. So that was pretty intense. But I would say that it definitely had a step back a few years into like really basic, how do you get this done all by yourself? Which did, in the long term, we're like trying to look for all these silver linings. It did allow us to really improve our systems. Like me doing it by myself, like I found the perfect label maker, like label printer that went with our mailing service, like the little things like that turned a mailing from a 5-hour job into a 1-hour job, weirdly, just like automated a couple little things. So I would say overall we will be, quote, much better for it. Maybe I just tell myself that to sleep better at night. But I would say we've made a lot of significant improvements that I really appreciate. And then, of course, in general, just, pivoting to virtual like everyone did. But we were, I would say that starting 2020, I'm sure many people have said this, but that was like the year. The 2020, like I can't even tell you, we had like, normally, you have like a couple, like, 2 books that you're like really, really sure of. Like, all your books are going to do all right, but like 2 books, you're totally sure these are going to be it. And 2020, I think in one season, we had like 7 of them that I knew for sure were going to be do really well. And they did well enough that we didn't tank 70% of our revenue, as was estimated across the publishing industry. We actually held steady. But it makes me wonder what we would have done if it wasn't for the pandemic. But yeah, I would say that was a little bit painful, but we did manage to pivot to virtual very quickly. I think within 5 weeks of the pandemic starting, we had started our virtual book series. And that was a huge amount of work, running a virtual book series every week on top of everything else, because we had to make sure that our authors had launches. We wanted them. Everybody was so stuck and so trapped, and no one knew how to host a virtual event at that point. So we definitely for the first 2 years, we just did every launch ourselves, like literally ourselves. Me and Monica figured out how to do events and then host a platform and buy little webcams and all that very, very quickly. And now it's sort of starting to vaguely go back to normal-ish, if normal means scheduling and canceling events repeatedly. No, I'd say at this point we're not scheduling a bunch of physical events. We are just gonna go ahead and wait till it's actually happening. And in the meantime, we found a lot of ways to make it work. I also got a new puppy during the pandemic. We make her now and then.
Yeah, I think a lot of people got a new puppy or cat.
I tried to resist, but I couldn't help it.
Oh, no point in resisting. Yes, Matt.
Before we move on, can I just jump in? I have to make a correction. I'm not. RJ Julia was the store that did the Gina Barreca Fast Funny Women. So apologies to RJ Julia. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good correction. RJ Julia are one of our local Connecticut bookstores. So I love hearing, so there's so many things here that I want to dig into in so little time, but I'm glad, Toby, that you mentioned marketing and virtual events, and we'll bring Megan up in a few minutes, Megan, who owns a bookstore, to talk about virtual events and the impact of the pandemic on the book selling side of the industry. But let's talk for just a second before we do that about, let's see, I have so many questions, but Matt, let's talk about the same question that I posed to Mark, which is, you can tell I'm scrolling through all my notes here. What is the single most important thing you tell an author whose book is coming out during a pandemic? How could they prepare? What have you learned that somebody could put into practice here?
Yeah, well, so we have kind of a 5-page cheat sheet that we send all our authors. So it's hard for me to put that into one.
Yeah.
But the sheet really hits on, a lot of the ways that authors can facilitate and support kind of the marketing efforts that the press does, and that they can do independently. I think that the most important thing an author can do is just engage with the audience. I mean, it's such a moment in history at this point with all the technology and social media platforms. And I also want to recommend, as a much longer answer to that question, that folks should sign up for the Writer's Bridge, which is co-hosted by Allison Williams, author of 7 Drafts, right here. She's great. She's wonderful, very generous with her advice and her expertise about, and the Writer's Bridge, the concept is, instead of a platform where you shout at people, it's a bridge where you connect with people. And, I'm trying to sum up her entire, 2 years of biweekly Zoom events into a paragraph for you. But, the spirit of it is that, as an author, as a writer, the more you can engage directly with your audience and interact through direct messages and, and your, posts and your blog posts and your newsletters and whatever other avenues you can, the more, support you'll have, and not just one way, but 2 ways, right? I mean, you can ask your audience for, to be a beta reader. You can sort of test drive some of your ideas, your chapters, or your paragraphs, through these interactions. So I guess that's, the number one thing I would recommend to authors is don't be invisible, right? Get out there, pick a platform that you really, feel comfortable with, and engage with your audience.
Yeah, speaking of platform, actually, can we bring Mark back up for just a second, and we'll keep all the panelists on, and then we'll switch over to Megan shortly after this. But we have a question here from Grace Connolly. So she says, Mark mentioned that building a following was important for nonfiction writers. Is this equally as important as the quality of the work and composing the work itself? Is it a turnoff to take an author on who may be a social media nerd? So question for all 3 of you, if someone wants to answer first. And thank you, Grace.
Well, since they posed the question to me, I'm happy to go first. I think for nonfiction, platform is really important. Obviously, the book needs to be well written, a good idea, but a lot of publishers in the nonfiction space want to know, like, whether someone is saying something from a soapbox or a Broadway stage type of thing. And it can be really daunting for a lot of authors of nonfiction because they're starting out, they think they have a great book idea, which they may, but then publishers will look at it and wonder, like, if they have like 1 million followers or something like that, or if they do speaking events, speaking engagements throughout the country, throughout the year, to hundreds, if not thousands of attendees. Publishers really love that built-in audience because they see it as an opportunity to sell the book. And partially, I think it's because nonfiction is really idea-driven. And so it's not just the idea, but also the person telling the idea. And nonfiction also tends to sell in slightly smaller numbers than fiction. So in order to help, the book sales make sense for the publisher, they really need an author who has the platform. So a lot of authors who are starting out, they get books on the subject, they learn how to begin to build an author platform, or at least like lend the perception that there's something there. And I think publishers will at the very least want to see like an author who is building those things, right? Has an author website, has social media pages. Even if the followers aren't quite there yet, eventually they need to be, but it's a good place to start.
Thank you, Mark. How about from the publishing side, Matt and Toby?
Toby, you want to take a shot? Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, so we publish all over the map. We've got poetry, we've got flash, we've got some sort of genre bending, we've got nonfiction, we've got fiction. I agree with Mark that for the nonfiction, the platform is more important. All authors, you kind of need a website, just so that when people Google you, they find something. We published Baron Wormser, who is he's an institution. He's a poet laureate in Maine, and he doesn't have any of that stuff. But we publish his work anyway because it's important and it's valuable and it's art. So it is possible, to publish without a giant social media following. But when you're starting out, you're trying to get that first publication. I think you want to have all the ammunition you can, and there are methods to developing and cultivating a group of supporters through the social media. And I'll mention the Writer's Bridge platform again, which offers those tools. There's lots of places that give you kind of the idiot's guide to growing your your Instagram followers. But the important thing is that it has to be authentic. Like if you sound like a bot, no one's going to want to buy your book. No one's interested. It really is about that engagement. And yeah, but the original question I think asked if platform or number of followers was equally important as the quality of the writing, and I would say no. The quality of the writing is paramount. You can't, if you have a bazillion followers, I can't sell your book if it's terrible, unless you are a Hollywood star or something. But that's all I got on that. I'll pass the mic. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. Let's come back to this conversation when we talk about marketing a little bit more later on. Let's switch over to Megan, and then we'll see you all again in a few minutes. So while I introduce Megan, let's bring her up. Megan Hayden is the author of Riverbend Bookshop, an independent bookstore in Glastonbury. She opened in 2018. Megan traded in a 20-year corporate career for the chance to help kids find the books that turn them into lifelong readers. Opening a bookshop was an unavoidable outcome of a lifetime of reading, genuine interest in serving the community she lives in, and a deep desire to never make a PowerPoint slide again. I definitely understand that desire. She describes her role in publishing in 5 words as last mile delivery, curating, and hand selling. So welcome, Megan.
Hi, Lara. Thanks for
Hi.
having me today. It's so exciting. I'm so new to this industry that I still get starstruck, and I still get so excited hearing the behind the scenes of how all of this comes together. As somebody who has just loved reading my whole life, getting to learn about the process and all the many, many, many people that go into creating a book is still fascinating, and I love it. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for joining us. No, and you are equally important in that sort of progression of a book from start to hopefully not finish. Hopefully a book has a long life, right, at a bookstore. But so tell us a little bit, I'm going to pose a similar question to you just to start the conversation. Talk a little bit about book selling in normal times and what the biggest change has been for you in this weird time we find ourselves in.
Well, what I'll tell you is I have no normal. Riverbend Bookshop, we opened in Glastonbury in November 2018. So 2019 was our startup year. Very foolishly, mid-January of 2020, my staff and I looked at each other and we were like, guys, we made it through a whole year. We've been through the whole cycle once. We've seen it all one time. So now we know what to expect. And, 8 weeks later, we closed our doors to browsing. So we had no normal. Genuinely, we were just really figuring out how to run a bookstore. So to then have to change everything, in some ways for us, was probably not as difficult as other businesses that were much more established and had much more structured roles and specialists who completed specific tasks. I'm thinking about those event managers at larger stores whose whole job was to fill auditoriums for book tours. We weren't there, and we didn't have that kind of specialization yet. The three of us that really run the shop were generalists every day anyhow. And when we had to close the doors to browsing, which we did almost immediately, we did that very early in March on our own accord before state mandates came out. But at that point, every day we just did what was necessary to keep going. And luckily our community really supported us. So right from the beginning, we started putting books out for pickup on our back porch. So people were calling us. They were using a website. Thankfully, we had a website for book sales. We barely knew how to use it. We used to get a few web orders a month. I would actually set it so that I would get an alert in my email if a web order had been placed, because it was so infrequent. About 3 weeks into the pandemic, I realized I could turn that off because I was in that web order system every minute. But thankfully, people were still coming out and picking up off the back porch or reaching inside the back door on rainy days when they had to be inside. But the whole time, all we did was just pivot. And, you mentioned I had a corporate career, and I did a lot of leadership development work and lots of training. And we worked a lot on idea generation and strategy. And one of the things that I think about now is the story, some of you might know this, about how the product Febreze came about, where they were in Procter & Gamble executives were in a design idea session with the Stanford IDEO team. And so their job is to think very, very creatively. And they were trying to figure out how to make a new product out of laundry detergent. And one of their methods is to try to break any product that you make into its most essential elements, and then ask what would happen if you took away this key element. And laundry detergent is really just soap, water, and fragrance. And somebody said, what if you take out the soap? Well, that's like crazy. That's what laundry detergent is, right? That's all it is. And then somebody realized, if you only have fragrance and water, then you can refresh your fabric. And now you can't escape Febreze in a grocery store. But that's exactly what we did at Riverbend and at most of the bookshops around here. We took away the one essential thing that makes us a bookstore, which is coming into the bookstore to browse. And we had to find a million other things that we could do that would fill that. So I had booksellers selling, hand-selling videos on Facebook. We were a call center. We had to get a second phone line. I don't know that we'd ever really heard the phone ring in the shop before because people just popped in. But we were part therapist, part bookseller on all those phone calls, trying to find just the right book. And for a lot of people, we were the only stop that they were making outside of the grocery store. So it was very therapeutic. I think our capacity to stay open and stay connected with people is what allowed the community to really, solidly connect with us and realize we need this in our town. So we're going to keep supporting it. And that's what's kept us here this whole time.
Oh my gosh. I love the story about Febreze and just how you can apply that to not just book selling, but really any career, right? So
Absolutely.
That's a great lesson. Yeah, I'll be thinking about that myself when I go back to work on Monday. But yeah, and congratulations on staying open and thriving, because it's hard enough to have a bookstore, I think, in normal times, much less in the midst of a global pandemic. So that shows a lot of creativity and leadership. So let's talk a little bit more. Well, actually, no, I'm going to take a question here because I think you're very well positioned to answer it. So Audrey asks, where did it go? Audrey asks, yes. Can you talk about the kind of books that you've seen sell best at different stages of the pandemic, if you've seen patterns emerge?
Oh, yeah. This is a great topic of conversation. We still reflect back on this because it's only after a little while that you can recognized that there was a pattern forming. The early days, that even in early March, when we knew something was probably happening, people were coming in just getting big stacks of books. Well, I'm going to need something to keep me busy for the 2 weeks that we're going to be at home, that thing. And very quickly, that did turn to classics. Mark mentioned that earlier. So finally, people were like, I'm going to read the Russian Masters, and I'm going to read Penguin Classics and all of that kind of stuff. We were bringing in loads of, and people were starting big series. So all those great fantasy series, Jemison, Sarah Moss, all of that, like anything that was big and beefy and people thought that they could get into it. People were getting into Terry Pratchett's Discworld. You know, they're like 85 books. So why not start now when you know you're going to have some free time? Then it switched. We didn't notice at first. Took a little while for us to catch on, but definitely all of that sourdough baking. People were calling the shop every day wanting to know when we were getting more sourdough baking books. And then self-help. Glennon Doyle's Untamed was I think our bestseller of all 2020. But anything in the category of self-help or reinvention or, making the most of what you have and shedding the things that no longer serve you. And then we saw a morph too. The longer that it went, the more people were gravitating towards things that would help them feel more spiritually grounded, books on dealing with grief, books on dealing with long-term change. It's really something that I never anticipated before opening the bookstore, that you get to know your community in such a different way, doing this kind of work and filling this need. So when we realized that the kinds of titles people were gravitating to were like Pema Chodron kinds of spirituality and centeredness, lots of mindfulness, lots of meditation, you just could see that it wasn't just you that was feeling this way, or it wasn't just our little bookstore staff that were experiencing these things. It was our whole community experiencing these waves at the same time. It was really a special thing to get to see it that way and to be a part of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's bring Toby back up and keep Megan on. And while we're bringing her up, Megan, I'm going to ask you a little bit about the marketing side and about events. So can you tell me, if you guys have had virtual events, what's sort of the recipe for the most successful author events that you've had?
We have had the great fortune of having loads of really fun and interesting virtual events. One of the cool things is that, distance doesn't play a factor anymore. So it's not just people who can easily drive to Glastonbury to come in for an event. So we've had authors from all over. We had a terrific event where the author is living in Paris at the moment, but wanted to do something with the bookstore, and our booksellers loved the book. So we had her on and had a great following, not just of our own community and our group of readers, but her own fan base. So that was really fun. Kids authors, we've had loads of virtual school visits, which was not a business that we had taken part in before the pandemic, but we've had really lovely and big name authors visit us. And through that format, I think also for some of the smaller presses and authors who maybe aren't yet known by name, we had the opportunity to let people just dip in and meet them. So there's something a little less frightening sometimes. You come to the bookstore for an event, you feel like, well, I have to buy the book, and I have to pretend to like this, even if I'm not, even if it doesn't really at the end feel like it's for me, and try to slink out unnoticed. But people could dip into events. So I think that our readers started coming to more. So they were just trying something that wouldn't necessarily have been something that they thought they'd like, but they just have something to do, and discovered new genres and new voices in a way that I'm sure that they would not have done so in a live setting. So there were some good things too.
Absolutely. Now, Toby, I know you guys have a lot of recommendations for your authors for how to promote their books, how to get out there and have a successful event, what else they can do to launch that book, especially if it's a debut for them. And I know you had to tailor some of that advice for this virtual space. So can you talk a little bit about the marketing
Yeah,
side
definitely.
of preparing an author to launch their book?
Yeah. Wow. Marketing. Well, I mean, not going into the boring parts of metadata, which, if you know what that is, it's detailed and well, is it boring? It's a little bit boring. It's just taking all of your beautiful, interesting information about your book and putting it into a really Excel-like format. So I would say, in terms of what with our authors, yeah, it's a little hard, right? How do you do a book tour if you can't go to different cities? So basically, we'll say, like, if you're not actually traveling, maybe you put up the cities that you're going to virtually tour, right? Yeah, and in terms of the events, at first we just wanted to make sure everyone got a launch. Then we got kind of creative with it, right? Like, we started doing thematic pairings, or like a craft talk. Instead of just like, these are the poets, it'd be like, how to write about poetry during a pandemic. Or, I don't think we did that exact event, but something like that, where people can come, listen, learn, have a little bit more of like get a more of a community vibe. We would also make sure to, when we would do rehearsals, which were, of course, tech checks to make sure everybody was good to go, but also kind of served to like bring everyone together right before the event. Everyone sort of already knew each other. They had a couple of jokes going in. So once we were on screen, people, all of our authors from all around the country, they actually felt like they had a little bit of a rapport, a little bit of a vibe going on. But yeah, to the point that we're all talking about earlier with events and social media, I generally tell authors, like, not everyone wants to do events. Like, I've had a couple authors who just are so terrified of public speaking. It's just miserable. And they just don't want to do it. I mean, it's not like they don't want, they almost can't do it, right? Some degree of that. And so I tell people, in terms of that, like, we have events, we've got social media, and you've got op-eds, right? If you can't stand events, like, lean into social media, lean into doing long read pitches or op-eds. I find people are either cool to do events or cool to do op-eds. Both is cool, obviously. But yeah, I'd say that's a way for people to sort of authentically lean into their best selves, right? Like, I would find like, a nonfiction writer is pretty easily gonna shove out a bunch of op-eds and like lean into that if you don't love doing events or whatever, or if you can't travel. And then in social media specifically, our advice is always, people can get really caught up in promoting their book and promoting their events and forget to bring in the personal. So we always say, like, no more than 1/3 promoting your book, no more than 1/3 promoting like an event, and absolutely at least 1/3 of personal content. And it doesn't have to be deep or vulnerable, or it doesn't have to be like the, corners of your heart. It can just be like your beautiful garden, your puppies, your life, something that gives people some sort of reasonable insight into you and yourself. And I agree that I don't think, if I, obviously, Lara, that we have an award series where we publish people where we don't even know if they have a social media following. So clearly that is not our top requirement. I would say, for me, I'm in marketing, you'd think that I would require that, but I don't. I do require a website. You've got to have a website, but as long as you've got an online presence to that extent, I mean, like we were all saying, if somebody's not going to be able to authentically like work with Twitter, they're just not going to be able to swing it. Like, I feel like, in terms of the ease, I feel like Facebook is kind of nebulous, right? You can post stuff, you cannot post stuff. You can put up events. It's kind of convenient and easy. Instagram, I feel like, is very easy, right? You just put up a picture and a caption, link in bio to buy your book. Twitter, I consider like the hard level of social media, because you have to like be willing to post several times a day, right? But yeah, I guess in short, events, social media, long read pitches. If you can do all three, amazing. But I advise at least doing your best to lean into the two if you really hate one of them. I mean, honestly, I think op-eds more than, I don't know, events are not quite as cut and dry for the cost, right? I had an author once who was like, oh, I paid this much in this hotel to be at this event. And I was like, yes. But also, it's not that moment. It's like, they're going to buy, right? They're going to buy the books for the event. And then if you're nice and you're sweet to people and you're good to the bookseller and you take them out to dinner after, they're going to remember you and they're going to sell your book. They're going to sell every book that you brought, and they're going to buy more books and keep selling them for the next 3 to 6 months, talking about how amazing this author was and how sweet they were and how they took me out to dinner. So that for me is more of what events are about. Like if 2 people show up, it almost doesn't matter if only 2 people showed up, because what matters are all the people who work at the bookstore who will talk about it for the next 6 months. Yeah.
That's fabulous. Megan, do you agree? Is that
nodding vigorously? Toby, I love you for saying that. It's so true. Like, we don't want you to only have 2 people at the event, but sometimes that happens. But we work our tails off to try to get, as many people to come. But absolutely, when we have a great experience with the author, we love to hand sell the book, because we have thousands and thousands of amazing choices right now. And so when somebody's coming in looking for a recommendation, of course, it's more fun to sell books that you have a personal connection to, that you have a story that we can say, oh, we met that author. They were incredible. You'll never believe the funny stuff that they told us. So you have to check the book out and then come back and talk to us, and we'll tell you all the secrets. And it makes a much deeper connection. So absolutely.
Yeah, you heard it here.
Snacks. Booksellers run on snacks. Yeah.
Snacks, drink. Maybe not at work, but after work. And puppies and kittens, if you're not following the chat, there's a lot going on here about cute videos. So let's bring all of the panelists up here for a question from, and I'm scrolling through here. All the questions keep moving around, so I'm trying to find them. Okay, so here's a good question from Audrey. Audrey asks, what kinds of changes have you seen during the pandemic that you think will stick long term? And she uses as an example the move to virtual author events. Even when in-person events are possible, will hybrid models be pursued? So let's see. Let's start with Matt or Mark. We've been away from us for a while, so let's hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So, I've spoken to some booksellers who, when there are sort of lulls in the quarantine levels, who've seen, sometimes there's a surge of people who are like, oh, I'm so happy to get out of my, my cage of my apartment, and I just want to like do real life IRL things. And they're, they get a lot of traffic. And then sometimes there's, moments where the restrictions go down, but there's still some caution out there, and so it doesn't have that surge of traffic. But I do think that if we ever return to kind of a pre-COVID world, that people want the human touch. They want that contact. I really hope that the Main Street kind of businesses can just hang on through this tunnel and get to the other side, so that we get to that moment. So I do think that all the kind of, real life stuff will come back. I don't think it's gonna, oh, we don't need that anymore. I think that there will be some changes in offices. Like lots of offices are saying, hey, we don't need to pay for all this real estate. So I think there's gonna be some changes there, but not on the bookstore stuff. So that was, and what stuff will stay? I think that going forward, since now everyone is a Zoom expert, right? Or Teams, or what platform are we on here? Whatever this is. I think that when bookstores do in-person events, they'll do hybrid, right? You'll be able to attend. And so, we'll get a multiplying effect on impressions. I know that I want to say Powell's is already doing that. There's some, bookstores that have the kind of reach where they have, they can do a digital thing and they can do an in-person thing, and they're doing it, right? So I think that change will stick. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, same question.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on some of that, I would say, I think for a long time, author tours were already really expensive for publishers, especially these big multi-city author tours, going like New York, Chicago, LA, airfares, meals, hotels, all that. So for a long time, like publishers were already cutting back on that. And I think like the pandemic making online events a lot easier. I mean, it's free in a lot of cases. You can reach people instantaneously. Anyone can tune in from anywhere. So I think it will be, in a sense, a hybrid of things, because on the one hand, we're social creatures. People really yearn for that in-person experience. It's why physical bookstores exist, because people want that like curatorial feel that they can't probably get on Amazon all the time. And so I think that's a big thing. And I also think that, yeah, with the change to the offices, it's kind of a toss up. On the one hand, I mean, technology has made it such that by the time we walk into the office, like most of the fires have been put out for, the day before we even get there. And this whole construct of an office was really like born out of the military industrial complex at a time when, there were factories and there weren't even phones or TVs or internet. And now that we have all these things, like, yeah, maybe it is a combination of things. I don't think it will ever be one thing. Like a lot of the tech companies are really pushing for, like, I think Microsoft and Spotify decided to go completely remote. And I think that works for some people. I think certainly for certain generations, it's really uncomfortable. I think some people are just social creatures, and more work gets done in an office setting. Like through the pandemic, I found that it was so much easier for me to walk down the hall to accounting and give them a check request than it was to drop it in a folder. And I thought to myself, why is it so much easier to have to like print out this form, walk it down the hall and drop it in a box than it is to click and drag it to a folder? And I realized because like along the way, I stop at the water cooler, I see people, I wave, I say hello, like I take the scenic route, I exchange some words with people in accounting. And by the time I get back to my desk, even though I took the scenic route, like I feel a lot better than, staring at a screen and clicking on a box. So I think people will kind of continue with both, I hope, but also be more understanding in such a way that the work-life balance and people being in the office or not is a lot more flexible. So yeah, those are some of the things I think will change, some of the things I think will stay. I think that printing will probably sort itself out eventually in terms of these plants. And I think that subscriptions are going to continue to become a big thing. Right now, I think we're in the process of seeing like an acquisition between Spotify and Audible, which will really change like the audiobook landscape again, and probably move books even further into a subscription model, which could be really dangerous for publishers if they don't think through it correctly, the way they did like early on with ebooks and what occurred with Amazon. So yeah, there's like some interesting stuff on the horizon that publishers are going to have to think about how to address properly, rather than taking what seems like easy money now from like a subscription service and only to later realize they've sold the family farm.
Thank you, Mark. So we're wrapping up here, but I want to switch over and see if Megan and Toby had anything they wanted to add to the conversation about what things we might see stick, or if you'd prefer to answer, what's something you'd like to see happen as we move, hopefully, out of the pandemic. So take your pick of what you'd like to talk about here.
Well, I don't want what Mark just said to happen at all. I didn't like any of that.
No one wants any of that
Roll
to
that
happen.
back.
By the way. Yeah.
Woof. Yeah, okay. So I definitely don't want that to happen. I would say, yeah, I mean, I think hybrid is like, makes me flinch a little, because the thing is about hybrid is that it's not, first of all, it's absolutely going to happen, right? Absolutely. The thing with hybrid is that it's not half of each, it's just everything twice. You got to plan the entire virtual event, and you have to plan the entire physical event, and that is just twice as much work. And as the person who does that work, I can say it is really overwhelming. And that's assuming that the people who are there in person are okay with their actual comfortable selves being streamed online, or you carefully do it on just the reader, and then what, you do it like football, like, oh, there's a pause, we go to a commercial break or something. we're gonna have to navigate all those weird things, or just pre-record, edit them, doing after. Just like every way to think about that increases the labor on publishing staff and bookstore staff so intensely. Not to mention the cost of like cameras, of like actual, not just like little webcams we can buy, but like an actual camera that's going to properly pick up video and audio for a speaker or an audience, and not pick up the person closing the door over and over. It's a little painful, but I do believe it's totally important because of accessibility. I mean, really, I could go on about other things, but really for me, it's about accessibility. Before the pandemic, 20% of Americans self-identified as having a physical disability, which to some extent must, in just that percentage alone, must affect people's ability to get to bookstores, let alone people who are just too far away, 2 hours away from a city, have kids, have whatever, broke their foot that month, right? The amount of like accessibility we've had for people who cannot go to physical events or just can't at that moment is pretty incredible. And there's no way, with all, whatever the trouble, the cost, however we're going to figure this out, there's no way to roll, for us at least, I don't think there's any way to roll back to purely physical and to cut out all those, I don't want to close any of those doors we've opened for the virtual space. Yeah, I definitely think moving forward, events are going to be very, very different. And they need to be more like events. And we say this all the time, right? They're not just readings now, they have to be events. You got to serve tequila or have a party or like, bring your puppy. Yeah, no, the party where we served tequila, that was a good reading. Highly recommend it. It was nice sipping tequila, just for the record. And it was relevant because we were reading about the chapter on tequila. But yeah, hybrid events, in some way being able to engage. I've been literally thinking about whether there was a way to get a person with a body cam for the event to become the liaison for the physical to virtual world, right? Body cam's a little bit of a creepy word nowadays, but you know what I mean? Like literally, like, I don't know, something weird like that.
I would love to attend a vodka event or a tequila event. Sorry, any of the event with alcohol would be lovely. Megan, let's have the last word from you.
I completely agree with all of you on the events. And yes, hybrid is kind of scary because it is more work for one event. What I think in the end, I hope, is that we don't ever forget how creative we all got when we had to, and that so many like really cool things came out of this and the types of connections. We had I received a letter from an author, which happens pretty regularly. I get postcards from authors about their books coming out and they want to let the shop know. I got one letter over the pandemic that was so funny that I immediately stopped what I was doing and went and ordered a stack of the book, because I thought, if their letter is this great, the book has to be amazing. And it is. And now I swear I'll always have it in the store. So that one act really helped. And that's an author that probably would have had lots of promotional opportunities in the before times, and then thought, well, let me do all the schmoozing that I would have done at book conferences and literary festivals and things, but let me just do it by letter, and it worked. And, authors that didn't get to do a tour, but had one or two really solid virtual events, and then got to come into the store and sign a big stack of books and take a few pictures and have their author care moment, in addition to doing the virtual thing. Like, just coming up with those creative ways to make people still feel good and connected to the whole process and have their launch and have the moment. I hope we don't forget that we figured all that stuff out once and we could do it again if we needed to.
Thank you. That's a great reminder to us moving forward, hopefully, again, out of the pandemic, but I'm not going to jinx us. I'll knock on wood over here that things will be very different, hopefully by next year at this time. But thank you all so much for joining us tonight. It's been, I think, a really fun conversation, and hopefully the audience here agrees. And thank you all for joining us. You've had a lot of fun, I think, in the chat over here, and some great questions this evening. So it's hard to say goodbye, but thank you all again for being here. Have a great night. And I'm going to invite Jotham back up here to tell you all about the next event in the series. So thank you so much, and good night. To have the awkward moment at the end.
Hey, there we are.
There you go.
You did it. Nice job. Thanks for
Thanks,
having it.
Jotham.
Laura, you did a wonderful job. I want to thank you very much, and thanks to all of our guests. Again, we postponed this, and we even had to book some guests, and they were terrific last minute. I will say before we go, Laura, we've talked a lot about publishing, and as a teacher of writing, I never talk about publishing very much. I talk about writing, and could you just tell everyone where you are and what you're doing right now?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll do a little pitch for the people at whose house I am currently staying. So I am not at my house. I am at Garrett on the Green, which is a writing residency retreat up near Utica in upstate New York. And they have a scholarship retreat once a year. You can check it out on their website. I think it's garrettonthegreen.com. So I was a scholarship winner back before the pandemic, and then as a repeat guest, they have a steep discount. So I booked this week to come up here and finish a novel I'm working on, and I can quickly just show you all this amazing, beautiful space that I'm in.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yep, and it's all mine for a week.
No husband, no kid.
No husband, no kid. And I think just a pitch for doing that during a pandemic, it's so important to carve out some space, whether it's in your own closet or if you can manage it in a beautiful, steeply discounted, amazing space in the middle of nowhere. Look it up, Garrett on the Green.
That's Garrett on the Green. So you go to Garrett on the Green, you write the book, and then you get published.
Exactly.
So good luck. Good luck with
Thank
that.
you. Thanks, Josh.
And it's been terrific. So we kicked off our season here. We are going to roll the dice, folks. We're going to try to have a live event on the 16th of February. I know it's going to be risky, but we're going to try to do it. I put the topic over there, Sparking Asian American Studies in Connecticut Schools. It's a talk. It's going to be at Real Artways. If you're in Connecticut, you can come by. It's plenty of space there, and they have popcorn and beer, and it'll be fun, and it's free. If not, we'll do it online, and you can join us right back here. We also have another piece. We're having a biography panel at the end of March. So there'll be more on our website. Please check it out. I want to thank Anna Castellano, our production supervisor, and everyone at our office back at Central Connecticut State and the English department and the faculty and administrative there. So have a good night. I'm going to have some dinner now, and I want to thank our guests and thank Laura, and we will see you next month for another Lit Talk. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.